Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. Before the vendor goes down, protect the care path. I want to start with a question that should make any healthcare leader pause for a second. If one mission-critical vendor went down tomorrow morning, what part of the care path would stop moving first? Not what platform would be offline, not which ticket would get opened, not who would call the vendor. I mean the care path, the part the patient actually feels, the part the front desk has to explain, the part the access team has to verify, the part the referral coordinator has to track, the part the provider assumes is still moving because yesterday it worked. That question matters because vendor dependency usually stays quiet until the route fails. When everything is working, the dependency disappears into the background. Eligibility comes back, messages go out. Referral status updates, claims move, appointments show. The system feels normal, and because it feels normal, leaders can start treating the route as if it is guaranteed. But in healthcare, a vendor outage rarely stays contained inside a technical box. It can start with a platform, but it spreads through the operation. Patient access feels it. Scheduling feels it. Referrals feel it. Billing feels it. Clinics feel it. Providers feel it. Patients feel it in the form of missing updates, unclear answers, delayed verification, or a front desk team that suddenly cannot explain what changed. That is why this is a strategic evasion problem. The vendor may be working today, but the forward read may already show exposure. The trap is not the vendor itself. The trap is depending on one route while nobody can explain the alternate route if that path goes dark. Strategic evasion is not running away from the problem. It is not avoiding responsibility. It is not saying the vendor will fail, so everyone should panic. Strategic evasion is route discipline. It is the leadership move that says, I can see a predictable trap forming. The objective still matters, and I need to steer around the exposure before the trap owns the operation. The route changes. The objective does not. The objective is still patient access. The objective is still care continuity. The objective is still communication. The objective is still referral movement. The objective is still operational stability. The objective is still trust. That distinction is important because some leaders confuse loyalty to the route with loyalty to the objective. They stay with the same path because it has worked so far. They keep depending on the same vendor flow because the platform is stable today. They tell themselves the support contract is in place, the technical team has the relationship, the downtime binder exists, and someone will send instructions if something happens. That may all be true. It may also be incomplete. A support contract is not an operating route. A downtime binder is not a practiced handoff. A technical recovery plan is not the same as patient-facing continuity. A vendor relationship is not the same as knowing what your clinics, access teams, referral teams, and front desk staff should do in the first hour of disruption. I have learned versions of this in operations. The route that works every day can make you overconfident. You stop seeing how much work is flowing through one path. Then when the path fails, you discover the dependency under pressure, and that is the worst possible time to build the read. You can still recover, but recovery is more expensive than preparation. The lesson is not to distrust every system. The lesson is to know what the system is carrying before the system disappears. There is also a quieter lesson here. A route can fail before it technically fails. It fails when people cannot describe what it carries. It fails when every team has a partial answer but no shared operating picture. It fails when the backup exists only as a document, not as a usable path. That is why a vendor can be online and the operation can still be exposed. The technology may still be working, but the leadership read is already showing a trap. Let's put this into the healthcare picture. Maya is the operations director for a multi-site outpatient network connected to a regional health system. The network includes primary care clinics, specialty clinics, a patient access center, a referral coordination team, and centralized billing support. The organization relies on a third-party platform that touches several daily workflows: eligibility checks, claim submission, referral communication, appointment-related patient messaging, some patient access updates, and parts of the payment and billing process. The platform is working today, the clinics are open, patients are scheduled, providers are seeing patients. Patient access is working the queues, referral coordination is moving cases, billing is submitting claims, no alert has arrived, no one is treating the day like a disruption. That is exactly why Maya raises the question in an operations review. If this platform went down tomorrow, what would stop moving first? The room does not have a clean answer. Information technology has the vendor relationship. Billing knows a few claims workarounds. Patient access has some manual steps, but they are not consistent across sites. Clinic managers know there are downtime binders, but not every team has practiced them. Referral coordination has informal tracking habits, but no shared operating picture. Some people know pieces of the path. Nobody owns the full care path if the platform is unavailable. That is the moment. The vendor has not failed. The platform is stable. But the forward read has revealed a trap. The operation depends on one route, and the alternate route is not clear enough to protect the objective. The short read says, information technology will handle it if something happens. The better read says, information technology may handle the technical issue, but operations must protect the care path. That is a different level of ownership. Now, to be clear, this is not a criticism of information technology. It is not a cyber lecture. It is not compliance guidance. It is not medical advice. This is an operating leadership issue. Information technology may own the ticket. Cybersecurity may own parts of the technical response. Compliance may own certain reporting questions. Finance may own revenue cycle exposure. But operations owns how the work keeps moving, while those teams do their part. Operations owns the instructions that reach the clinics. Operations owns whether patient access knows the first hour route. Operations owns whether the front desk gives one consistent message or 5 different versions. Operations owns whether referral coordinators know what to track. Operations owns whether providers understand what patients may or may not have received. Operations owns whether affected work is captured cleanly for recovery later. If that sounds uncomfortable, it should. Because dependency problems often cross clean department lines. No single function feels like it owns the entire exposure. Each team owns a slice. That is how the gap survives. In Maya's case, every team has a piece of responsibility. But when the question becomes what happens to the patient if this platform is unavailable, the answer cannot be a pile of separate pieces. It has to become an operating route. That is what strategic evasion forces into view. It does not wait for the vendor outage to prove the dependency. It asks the leader to name the dependency while there is still time to steer. And that is why the timing matters. If Maya asks this question during the outage, the question creates stress. If she asks it before the outage, the question creates control. Same question, different moment, different consequence. Strategic evasion is often about using the right question while there is still room for the answer to matter. Think about the normal path. A patient calls to confirm an appointment. Patient access checks eligibility. The appointment stays on the schedule. A referral status update moves. A patient message goes out. The clinic assumes the patient received the update. The visit happens. Claims move after the visit. Billing follows the expected path. Nobody sees the vendor because the vendor is just part of the movement. Now think about the exposed path. Eligibility does not return. Patient access does not know which appointment types require manual verification. Referral status becomes harder to confirm. Patient messages do not send or cannot be trusted. Clinic teams do not know what patients have been told. Billing delays create confusion later. Staff begin creating local workarounds. One site tracks affected patients in a spreadsheet. Another site uses email. Another keeps calling the same central number. Another waits for instructions. Now, the outage is not just a vendor problem, it is a coordination problem. It is a communication problem. It is an ownership problem. It is a patient trust problem. And the hard part is this: the organization may not realize how exposed it is until the phones start ringing. That is the failure strategic evasion is designed to prevent. A leader using this tool does not need to predict the exact outage. The leader needs to see the trap clearly enough to adjust the route. That means naming what the vendor carries, identifying what could stop, deciding who owns the first operating move, and defining the trigger that tells the team when the alternate path becomes active. That is the recognition layer. And even at the recognition layer, it changes the leadership posture. Instead of saying we will deal with it if it happens, The leader says we can already see the dependency, so the alternate path needs to be visible before the dependency fails. This is where the pressure becomes real because the organization has plenty of reasons to wait. Clinics are already busy. Patient access is already carrying volume. Referral teams have queues. Billing has deadlines. Managers are dealing with staffing, provider schedules, patient messages, documentation load, and daily flow. Nobody wants another planning conversation. Nobody wants to run a downtime exercise when the platform is still working. Nobody wants to create alarm. Nobody wants to prepare for a disruption that may not happen this week. That is why leaders stay on the route. And sometimes staying on the route is the right move. Not every concern deserves a major adjustment. Not every vendor risk requires immediate action. Not every warning signal means stop the operation and rebuild the process. Strategic evasion is not overreaction. It is a disciplined decision to change route only when the trap is visible, consequential, and avoidable. Visible means the dependency can be named. Consequential means the failure could affect patients, staff, workflow, trust, access, or recovery. Avoidable means the leader still has enough time to reduce exposure before contact. If those conditions are present, waiting for the outage to prove the point is poor route discipline. Maya does not need to rebuild the whole enterprise. She does not need to create a technical architecture map. She does not need to solve every vendor risk in one meeting. She needs to start where the exposure is highest. One platform, one care path, one first-hour route, one clear owner, one trigger that tells the team when to shift. That is how the tool stays practical. The mistake would be trying to make this perfect. Perfect becomes too slow, too large, and too hard to sustain. Strategic evasion is not asking Maya to remove every risk from healthcare operations. That is not realistic. It is asking her to stop walking toward a known trap without a route around it. That is a much cleaner standard. Let's say Maya starts with eligibility for high-volume appointments. That is not the only possible starting point, but it gives the team a clear place to learn. She asks what happens if eligibility does not return. Which appointment types become uncertain? Which patients need extra verification before arrival? What should patient access do instead of repeatedly refreshing the platform? Who owns manual verification? What does the clinic need to know before check-in starts? What gets documented? What gets tracked for later recovery? Who decides whether the appointment continues, delays, or escalates? Notice the language. This is not clinical decision-making. This is operating clarity. If she starts with patient messaging, the questions change. Which appointment updates depend on the vendor? How will the clinic know whether a message went out? Which patients need direct contact? What should staff say if a message did not send? Who approves the language? What should not be said? What schedule changes create risk if patients are not notified? If she starts with referral communication, the questions change again. Which referral status updates depend on the platform? What stalls if the route is unavailable? Who tracks affected referrals? Who notifies the clinic? What needs escalation? What patient-facing confusion could occur if the referral path becomes unclear? That is the value of strategic evasion. It does not make the leader solve every possible problem in theory. It makes the leader choose a route around the visible trap before the trap becomes an active disruption. The leader is not avoiding the work. The leader is avoiding the collision. Now look at the consequence chain if Maya does nothing. The first consequence is confusion. The alert arrives and teams are not sure what changed or what it affects. That confusion spreads faster than most leaders expect because staff are still trying to serve patients while the operating picture is unclear. The second consequence is inconsistency. One clinic pauses certain work, another clinic keeps moving. One front desk gives one explanation, another gives a different explanation. One access lead starts tracking manually. Another waits for central guidance. Everyone is trying to help, but the operation starts producing variation at the worst possible time. The third consequence is patient-facing friction. Patients may receive late updates, no updates, conflicting updates, or instructions that staff cannot verify. A patient may arrive for an appointment that needed a different verification path. A patient may wait for a referral update that nobody can confirm. A patient may call later about billing confusion created by delayed movement behind the scenes. The fourth consequence is staff strain. Patient access gets hit first. Front desk teams absorb frustration. Referral coordinators chase unclear status. Clinic managers interpret partial information. Providers ask what patients know. Billing teams inherit cleanup. The people closest to the patient end up explaining a failure they did not create. The fifth consequence is leadership control loss. Leaders spend the first hours discovering dependency instead of managing impact. That is one of the most expensive forms of delay. It feels like analysis, but really the organization is trying to build the map while already driving through the storm. The sixth consequence is trust. Patients may not know which vendor failed. They may not care. What they know is whether the organization can give them a clear next step when something changes. That is the cost of waiting too long. The outage may start outside the organization. The patient experience still belongs to the organization. There is another consequence that is easy to miss. When the alternate path is unclear, good people start making local judgment calls in isolation. That is not because they are careless. It is because they are trying to keep the day moving. A front desk lead creates a script. A referral coordinator builds a tracker. A clinic manager tells staff to use a temporary workaround. A billing supervisor holds certain items until they know more. Each move may make sense locally, but together they can create a second problem, recovery confusion. After the vendor returns, leadership has to figure out what was paused, what was moved, what was duplicated, what was promised, what was missed, and what patients were told. That is why the alternate route has to be named before pressure forces improvisation. And this is why early route work matters. It gives people a common lane before stress makes every lane look reasonable. It protects the patient from mixed messages. It protects staff from being blamed for improvising in a system that never gave them a clean fallback. And it protects leaders from spending recovery time untangling work that could have been sequenced earlier. That is not administrative cleanup. That is operating discipline before the disruption becomes the teacher later. This is the better read. The better read is not never trust vendors. That is unrealistic and not useful. The better read is not information technology should own everything. That gives operations an excuse to stop thinking. The better read is not build a massive backup process for every possible failure. That can create waste and noise. The better read is this. A stable vendor can still create operational exposure if the care path has no alternate route. That statement changes the leadership target. Now, the leader is not asking only whether the platform works today. The leader is asking what the platform carries, what stops if it fails, who owns the first move, what patients need to hear, and when the team changes route. That is recognition. That is the level of public lesson that matters here. Inside the full strategic evasion training path, a leader would go deeper into the forward read, the forming trap, the objective, the exposure, the alternate path, ownership, communication, reassessment, and fallback strategy. But in this briefing, I want the main pattern to stay sharp. Do not walk into a trap you can already see forming. If the care path depends on a route and no one can explain what happens if that route fails, the trap is already visible. This is where strategic evasion fits inside the larger direct action system. CSA helps the leader read what is happening before action. In Maya's case, CSA keeps her from seeing only the vendor name. It widens the read to patient access, scheduling, clinic flow, referral movement, patient messaging, billing recovery, staff capacity, provider confidence, and trust. That cleaner read gives Deepen better material to work with. Deepen is problem navigation. It helps the leader decide what kind of move is required. Is this an active disruption that needs stabilization? Is this an obstacle already blocking the path? Is this an issue that should be postponed, or is this a predictable trap that can still be avoided before contact? In this case, strategic evasion is the right move because the vendor is still working, the care path is still moving, and the organization still has time to steer around the exposure. That decision also gives Pro a clearer risk picture. If Maya ignores the dependency, what could be damaged? Patient trust, staff credibility, provider confidence, financial recovery, operational stability, leadership control. Pro helps sharpen that consequence before damage spreads. TMC becomes important after the alternate path is selected. A route is not protected until direction, ownership, communication method, and follow-through are clear. If patient access, clinics, referral teams, and billing all receive different instructions, the route is still weak. PACE and BRAIN help when backup paths need comparison. Which alternate route is realistic? What information matters? What are the trade-offs? What protects patients without creating more confusion? What can the organization actually sustain? FLS matters when the alternate path becomes action. It turns intent into controlled execution. A plan that sounds good in a meeting still has to move through people, timing, handoffs, and decisions. And later, ALC helps the organization capture what changed, what worked, what failed, and what should feed the next cycle. That prevents the same dependency from becoming the same surprise again. That is the system connection. Strategic evasion is not a standalone trick. It is one move inside a larger operating discipline. CSA improves the read. Deepen helps choose the problem path. Strategic evasion protects the objective before the trap activates. The rest of the system helps risk check, communicate, execute, and learn. The tool stays the point, and the system gives it strength. Now bring this back to your own environment. You may not run a multi-site outpatient network. You may manage one clinic. You may lead a patient access team. You may supervise referrals. You may support provider operations. You may manage front desk workflows. You may own care coordination. You may lead a department that depends on systems you do not control. The question still applies. Where do you have a route that works today but would expose patients, staff, or workflow tomorrow if it failed? It may be a vendor platform. It may be a patient portal function. It may be a scheduling system. It may be a referral status tool. It may be a lab interface. It may be an imaging access path. It may be a patient messaging route. It may be a billing dependency. It may even be one experienced person who knows the workaround everyone else depends on, but nobody has documented. The form can change. The leadership pattern does not. If the operation depends on a route and no one knows what happens when the route fails, you have a forming trap. You do not need to panic. You do not need to overbuild. You need to read it before it becomes active. And start with one dependency. Name what it carries. Name what stops if it fails. Name who feels the disruption first. Name who owns the first hour operating response. Name what message patients need before staff begin improvising. Name the trigger that tells the team to shift routes. That is not a full implementation plan. It is a practical recognition check. And it is enough to tell you whether the care path is more exposed than the dashboard suggests. One more thing. Do not only look for the vendor with the biggest contract. Look for the route with the highest patient-facing consequence if it disappears. Sometimes the biggest exposure is not the biggest invoice. It is the quiet dependency everyone uses all day without thinking about it. That is where the trap can hide. Here is the final takeaway. The vendor does not have to be down for the trap to be real. The trap is real when the care path depends on one route, and no one can explain the alternate path if that route fails. A strong vendor relationship helps. A stable platform helps. A technical response plan helps. But none of those replace operating discipline. The leader has to protect the objective before the route fails. That means seeing dependency as part of the care path, not just part of the technology stack. It means refusing to wait for patients, staff, clinics, and providers to become the proof that the trap was visible too late. A vendor dependency is not the trap. An unnamed dependency with no alternate route is the trap. Before the vendor goes down, protect the care path. That is strategic evasion, not running away from the problem, refusing to walk into a problem the organization can already see forming. When you are ready to go deeper with this tool, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course tied to this tool, and start there. That is where you can find the deeper application of this tool. Thanks for listening to the briefing.